Okay, so good afternoon. It is Tuesday, April 12th, and this is Senate Government Operations. And today we are looking at H96, an act relating to creating the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And before we start, because many of you aren't with us in this committee all the time, we'll introduce ourselves so that, and then we'll get started. So I'm Jeanette White from Windham County.
Hi, excuse me, I'm Anthony Felina from Washington County.
Senator Keisha Hinsdale from Chittenden County.
Ryan Collmore representing the Rutland District.
And in about half an hour, we will be joined by Senator Clarkson from Windsor District. So Damien did a walkthrough of this bill for us on Friday, I believe it was. Anyway, he did a walkthrough for us. So we have been through the bill, but we didn't have time on Friday at all to take any testimony. So all we've done is walk through the bill. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, if it's okay with you, I'm just going to go according to the list that I have here, unless anybody has any time constraints. And if somebody has a time constraint, if you would let me know, and then we'll jump to you first. I don't see anybody waving their hands or jumping up and down, so we'll just go with the list as it is here. And Damien is with us, but he is with us on Zoom, as are most of you. So and actually we have Representative Stevens as the first person on our list, but he's not here yet. So we're going to start with Representative Coach Christie. So Coach, do you want to tell us what we're doing here and why we're doing it?
Madam Chair and Senators, thank you for this opportunity. For the record, I am Representative Kevin Coach Christie, co-sponsor of H96 and a member of House Judiciary. My initial comments I'd like to keep brief, since you had the opportunity to review the technical aspects, of the bill. And I'd like you to just think in terms of, why truth and reconciliation and why now. Systemic racism exists and it is alive and well here in Vermont. Yet as we see, now is a perfect time for us in our legislative duties to reaffirm our commitment to mitigating systemic racism in our state. I know how difficult it is to understand how Black and Brown and Indigenous and all disenfranchised Vermonters are feeling at this moment in time. So I'd like you to just reflect, as you do so well, as we do the people's work, and think about when was the last time you were told to go back to the jungle. That's what my daughter was told in school here in Vermont. We still have a lot of work to do, and we need to do it together. You notice the emphasis on together. H96 is an intentional step to get us on that path. So I ask for your support, and I will stay for the length of the testimony. So if I can help clarify as we move forward, I will be happy to do so. But I really appreciate everyone that's here today working with us on this mission. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Coach. And just so that people know, I intend, I believe, because I'm not sure that we'll get through all of this today in a meaningful way. So I am planning to take it up again next week and probably on Tuesday. But I'm not sure. Tuesday is the only day that this committee has where we're guaranteed not to be interrupted by the floor sessions because floor is in the morning. So at this point, I think our intention is to also take this up next Tuesday, just so that you know.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so Representative Colson.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee. Good to be with you. Representative Hal Colston from Winooski. I believe that it is Vermont's destiny to stand up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The question is now the time? I hope so. I believe that as a state, we're going to be facing with reparations on the horizon. In Burlington, Vermont, they've already gone down this path, standing up a reparations task force to understand the harm caused by chattel slavery in Vermont. I co-sponsored this bill along with Representative Christie because I believe that a Truth and Reconciliation Commission provides a space where we can share and understand our truth. This allows for reconciliation and the healing of the broken relationships that have taken place over many, many years through our policies and laws that have had a harmful impact on BIPOC Vermonters. I believe that this leads to trust. And I'm reminded of a quote of the late James Baldwin in his letter to his nephew, who once said that white people are stuck in a history that they don't even know. And I truly believe a Truth and Reconciliation Commission will bring those truths to light. And as Representative Christie said, that we can all work together and make sure that as we go forward, we will have this lens of understanding that a Truth and Reconciliation Commission will provide to make sure that when we do our work, we're doing it for the good of all Vermonters. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for, I will say, I think I'm seeing Senator Ram Hinsdale's hand jumping around there, so I think she's gonna have a question, but before we go there, I'm going to thank you for the input you had on the creation of the Agency of Public Safety. That was very helpful in creating the office. It changed its name a little bit, but that was very helpful when you weighed in there, so thank you. Senator Ram Hinsdale.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of waited until both Representatives Christie and Colston had spoken, and I feel like either of you could address this, and other speakers may as well. I appreciate raising, what other municipalities are doing. We are also looking at California starting to speak directly to descendants of slaves and helping people with genealogical records on that front. And I just wanted to put out the intention and get your response to naming Black Vermonters more specifically in the language, because it talks about people of color. But I will say, as a brown woman, I don't feel like I have been impacted by the two original sins of this country, the enslavement of Black people and the erasure of Indigenous people in the same way, and that both really deserve to be reflected in the language. And I just didn't know if you had any specific concerns around that or had contemplated that and sort of decided against it.
Yes, please, Representative Colston.
Thank you for that question, Senator. It was my original intent that this type of platform, type of structure would be established in a way that any group that has experienced oppression because of our policies and laws could take advantage of this process. So that's how I conceived of this going forward, so that it's more or less an umbrella that all can find a place under, and to be able to go through the process of sharing their truth, which will lead to our better understanding of how do we repair the harm of whatever group that steps forward.
I guess I'll let Coach go on. Yeah.
I'll just reiterate what Representative Colston, had said. It's a question of a model. When we originally started talking about this endeavor, knowing full well that a number of different entities have been impacted, by oppression through our history. But process rules. If you've got a very strong model, it can be replicated, across all platforms. And so I'm in full agreement with Representative Colston that this is an opportunity. Creating this entity would allow us the capability to address those wrongs across all platforms. So, thanks.
Thanks. I think I'm going to jump, Representative Stevens. We jumped ahead here. You weren't with us, but if you would like to join in. And so far, what we've done is we've had short statements from both Representative Coach Christie and Representative Colston. And if you would like to weigh in, that would be great.
Sure. It's sort of an introductory to sort of as I pass the baton from the House to the Senate.
And just so that you know, Damien did walk us through the bill. So we've had that's as far as we've gotten, is just a walkthrough.
Sure. No, I want to thank you for asking me to come in to talk about H96. H96 is essentially our follow-up to JRH2, which was the apology for the eugenics surveys back in the early to mid 20th century. And one of the things that became clear while we were working on JRH2 was simply that an apology without a follow-up are empty words. And so this idea of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I think, has been seen across the globe as a next step. It is a process by which the folks that Coach was talking about and the people that we were discussing, not only in the eugenics survey, but others that are included in H96, have a real opportunity to talk about what their truth is, about how they feel about their lives and their beings within the state and how state policies have affected them and perhaps created harm. And yet our job was to create in this case, a commission where the state had to really take a step back. So we can't be the judge and jury and defendant in these conversations, and we have to create a place where these populations, these Vermonters, have an ability to speak their truths, and then to have those truths synthesized through this commission. And so that was the immediate goal. And then it was a question of architecture, of how are we going to build this commission. I felt like this was very much a feat of engineering, taking into account not only the voices of some of the folks that are testifying today, but also working with the International Center for Transitional Justice, who has done this work across the globe, including work that's currently being done in Maryland in particular, and certainly in Evanston, Illinois, where the idea of reparations has gotten much further along than what we're even talking about in this bill. We're not talking about reparations in this bill. We're just talking about making sure that we have a process by which any actions we take in the future that will help our relationships with the folks who were harmed has a basis that we can build off of, has a foundation that we can build off of. And that was truly an important piece of our attitude towards this work. And so we felt that the commissioners in particular had to be professional. They had to be state employees. They had to be paid a living wage, more than a living wage at this, a little bit more than a living wage in this proposal, because we didn't want people doing this part-time. We wanted them to be able to focus on this work, because our work over the last 2 years, both on JRH2 and on this bill, it's been incredibly moving and incredibly emotional, and incredibly difficult in the face of criticism. But we do think that the commissioner set up here with an executive director and then staff is an appropriate and right-sized mechanism to then step aside from what we're used to seeing in government operations, to see a commission that sort of steps aside and does the work without the influence of the legislature or the current administration, so that they can do the work, so that the people who are coming forward to share their stories and their truths feel like it's being heard and listened to and believed. And it's hard for us to step back. It's hard for us to not want to keep our fingers in it. But our goal in creating H96 was to make sure that we had to step back and that the commission would come back to us with the information, not only an update in a couple of years, but also with a final report in 2026. So that work was done over the course of the first half of this session. I think we started it last year, of course, with the introduction of H96 early on as a short form. But again, trying to work and find the right language in a sensitive way that really appreciated the fact that any of the groups that we mentioned in this bill are not like each other. They each have a different voice. They each have a different series of questions and harms to describe. And we felt that it was really important to make sure that they had a place, that the commissioners had the option to create the different commissions within their different committees within the larger commission in order to get that work done. So I think I'll just leave it there. It passed out of our committee, I believe, by an 8-3 vote or 8-2-1 vote. Actually, we had one absentee, and it passed by voice or by roll call vote, 109 to 32 in the House. And we appreciate you really taking this up and looking into it. And I hope you'll find, if you have questions, that you'll feel free to ask either now or over the course of your work on the bill.
Thank you. I think we definitely will feel free to ask questions.
Yes.
As we're hoping to do. Unfortunately, as you probably know, we have a very short period of time to address this. I think we have 2 weeks left, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So we will do our best. So I see Susanna isn't here yet. Damien, Susan, Susan Aronoff, do you want to, you're the next one on my list here.
Sure. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Government Operations Committee. Thank you very much for inviting me to testify this afternoon. My name is Susan Aronoff. I do policy work for the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council. Since I don't spend very much time with your committee, Madam Chair, if it's all right, I'd like to explain how it is that I, as a state employee, get to advocate on behalf of people with disabilities and their family members to have a voice in every policy that impacts their lives without any fear of repercussion from the Agency of Human Services or any other state official that we might take a different position from. It's simply because I work for the Developmental Disabilities Council. All 50 states and territories has one. We are entirely federally funded, and we exist because of civil rights bills that were created when Geraldo Rivera, way back when, was actually an investigative reporter, went into Willowbrook and other facilities, institutions for people with disabilities, and discovered the horrific conditions there. The federal response, because the photos just really shocked the conscience of the country, was to create a protection and advocacy system and civil rights laws for people with disabilities. The protection and advocacy system in Vermont, you're aware of some of our partners, Disability Rights Vermont, Vermont Legal Aids, Disability Law Project, and my organization, the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council. The council is made up of a majority of people with disabilities and their family members. We also have participation from a number of state officials, state offices like the Department of Health and Agency of Education, folks who work with people with disabilities. We have our own policy committee, and every year we adopt a legislative platform. So when I share with you what our position or views of this bill are, I just want to assure you I'm not sharing my views. They're the views of a 23-member council with a very active policy committee. So our council, our platform this session includes H96. It includes taking next steps in response to the eugenics apology of last year, which I want to take this time right now to thank Chair Stevens for his being such a champion to get that apology through, and the other Representative Colston and Christie as well. It meant so much to the disability community to have the harms of eugenics acknowledged, and to recognize that legislators, really well-meaning, probably considered progressive in their day, it should be a lesson to all of us, were the ones who thought it would be a really good idea to eliminate some people from the gene pool. We are still paying a heavy price today in Vermont, nationally, for these policies. Last night, there was a 2-hour meeting that was one of the Disability Awareness Day activities. It was focused on housing. And the situation for Vermonters with disabilities in terms of housing is just abysmal. 30 years after we closed Brandon, and parents of adults with disabilities are literally afraid to go to their graves because they don't know how their loved ones will live safely and securely in Vermont. When people stop and talk about Vermont values, I'm sorry, I don't think that's consistent with Vermont values. That 30 years after closing Brandon, we were the second state in the country to close our institution for people with developmental disabilities, which, as you know, was first called the School for Feeble-Minded Children. When I talk about eugenics to my council members and others in the disability community, I always have to preface my discussions with trigger warnings. Just the names of the institutions alone are just really painful and offensive. So I would encourage you to support H96. It's really important that the state do something more than just apologize for the harms that were caused by the state's own laws and policies by eugenics. And H96 is, I think, a really good way to allow the communities that were impacted to bring forth their own truths and stories. I don't know of anything more powerful, more impactful than I've ever experienced in my life, honestly, than listening to the stories of the families who were told, give up your son or your daughter to Brandon, forget you ever had this child. And I've heard a lot of those stories since I've had this job. So I thank you for your time, and I'm available for any questions, and I hope you will support this bill.
Thank you, Susan. I think what I'm going to do is go just a little bit out of order right now because that there is a section that talks about individuals with a physical or mental disability and the families of individuals with a physical or mental disability. And we had a note from Wilda White commenting that it doesn't address the oppression based on psychiatric diagnosis, and that's different. So I think what I'm going to do is jump to Wilda now, if that's okay, to follow up because it seems to be connected. So Wilda, are you, Susan, did you have a comment?
Yes, I would just like to comment. I read Wilda White's testimony, and when I'm a recovering lawyer myself, and I represented people with psychiatric disabilities who were thought to have psychiatric disabilities for about 20 years. I totally support Wilda's comments. I personally don't care for the use of the word disability in legal documents because it's such a legally defined term. You know, 5 people can have the same illness or disease, and only one of them might be meet the definition of a person with a disability. And very often, people don't have a quote unquote disability, but other people think they do. So I love that Wilda focuses on people's actual and perceived differences. The language that I think was in the apology, in part of the apology, just use a simple phrase, physical or mental condition. I have no objection to physical or psychiatric condition, but it just connotes a different treatment based on a physical difference. It doesn't have to be a disability. People get treated differently by things that we would never consider a disability, birthmarks, limp, whatever. So I kind of like the simple, try to use a lot of plain language in the developmental disability world, and we kind of like physical mental condition. But I totally support Wilda's point about it's not just people with actual conditions, it's other people think have conditions.
Thank you, Susan. Wilda, would you like to join us? I think you're there. We see you. I mean, we don't see your face. We see your name. And Wilda may have thought she was going to be much later on the agenda because I just added her. But so I guess with that, until Wilda joins us, I think that what we'll do is Max is near. Carol, would you like to join us here? Carol McGranahan?
McGranahan, yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and everyone for inviting me to testify today. I'm Carol McGranahan, and I'm the current chair of the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs. A lot of what I've heard already, I'll probably repeat a little bit, but I think it's important to hear the emphasis on certain things. I do want to say that the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs supports the Truth and Reconciliation Bill. The eugenics apology issued last year was the first step in acknowledging the harm done to Abenaki and other marginalized people. It also recognizes that actions need to be taken in order for a truly meaningful accountability to happen. Last year, the commission invited the 5 chiefs of the recognized tribes to hold council with us, and they shared what was most important to their tribes in recovering what our people have lost since first contact. First on everyone's list is land stewardship and repatriation. We are a land-based people with limited access to land in what others call Vermont, and we call our homeland. It is a key component of our culture. Others on the list include education, to teach a more accurate history of Vermont, which includes the Abenaki and our contributions, to provide and assist those seeking to better themselves by giving scholarships to Abenaki for Vermont post-secondary institutions. Healthcare and clinics to provide places for traditional providers and medicines, as well as those trained in Western medicines. Cultural centers to establish locations where Abenaki communities can gather to teach our culture, language, crafts, and spiritual practices. As part of our information gathering, the Commission also met with the International Center for Transitional Justice to understand more about the process of reconciliation and what it means. We learned that it is imperative for all who are affected to be included and have a voice which is heard and respected. We realize this effort will be a time and work-intensive task, but one that needs to be done in order to gather the data and information needed. This bill would allow the work toward truth and reconciliation to begin. It is needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Carol? Okay. Chief Don Stevens, are you with us? I see.
I am. Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I would like to start saying that we do also support the Truth and Reconciliation Bill. And there's been a lot of wonderful testimony so far. And I would like to say we agree with everything that Coach and Rep. Colston and Carol and Tom have all stated, along with Susan and others. I also want to thank all of the legislative bodies for having the courage to actually take on this, being in a state that's over 90% white European. I think taking on an issue like this is very important. And I believe that having the courage to address these issues, to even have a discussion, has to be acknowledged. So I just at least want to say that. Going back to this bill, my grandmother was directly affected by this bill, and I can tell you she would not want to be here. She would not want to have these discussions because she just wants to be who she is. She just wanted to be who she was. She didn't want to be targeted. She didn't want to be in the spotlight. She didn't want to have to change her name. She didn't want to be ostracized. She wanted none of those things except just to be who she is. And we have seen in this day and age, the lateral violence, the ethnocide, the continuing things in the media of why someone should be suppressed. And I think it doesn't matter how much color you have in your skin, black, brown, or whatever, or even indigenous, how Indian you are or not. It's about oppressing someone's right of equality. And I think that this bill tries to address, not to give people anything special. It's not about giving something somebody hasn't had already. It's about giving us the ability to be on a level playing field, to try to recoup some of the generational land equity that has been afforded to many others because our land was removed from our ability, and hence why we have other bills in place, why we've been systematically erased from education in our schools. You know, I hope this bill creates results, as in not even creates it, but demands results from the committees, because we've seen a lot of committees formed over the years to provide recommendations that form for 2-3 years, and they only recommend that somebody doesn't have to actually abide by. You know, I don't want to say or the Ethnic Studies Bill or the H3 or H.9 or whatever that act was of creating educational opportunities in the school systems. I haven't seen a lot of action on that. I just wanted to say that was a committee to recommend. I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping there's a lot of movement in there, but I haven't seen anything into having the schools teach about us. It all comes from the groundswells of what teachers want to do. I think this bill will help in that, creating some guidelines to help uplift people. It's about uplifting, not suppressing. And I think in this day and age where there's a lot of bills that have to be written to guarantee that you're not discriminated against for sexual orientation or for gender or any, this is where the role of legislators come in, that when left to their own devices, society seems to have people that want to continue to suppress others. And by having something in legal statute, it allows to prevent some of that from happening on people's own devices. So I think with Vermont becoming more of accepting more minorities into this state, including potentially Ukrainians, and we've seen other people who have come to this state, they need to be protected just as much as we do as new Americans coming to this state. So, but I also want to say the harms that have done, that's what this bill is addressing. How do we fix some of those wrongs? So I just want to say that this is a bill that is trying to allow us to come up to a level playing field, to allow us to get some of the harm that was done back, to try to right those wrongs. And I think we fully support this. And it's about equality and continued non-suppression. Same with ethnocide. We can't stand for ethnocide just as well as genocide. So thank you. If you have any questions, I appreciate your support.
Thank you very much. And Chief, are you sitting outside in front of that beautiful scene, or is that a virtual background you have?
It is a virtual background. My wife actually is a photographer, and this is of Chittenden Pond. We were kayaking a couple years ago, and she took this picture. And
beautiful.
I politely commandeered it for my background, because if you saw my office where I'm actually in a room that used to be my son's bedroom, and it has a lot of native display items, and it's kind of messy. So I thought you would much rather look at what connects us to of who we are. We are place-based people, as Carol said. We are connected to the land. This is our spiritual sanctuary. That maybe you would find it calming and just something nice to look at, other than me, because I'm not so pretty. So you can look past me to the scenery. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's very nice.
I'll let my wife know that you liked her picture.
Yes, I like it very much. Wilda, are you with us yet?
She might be on the phone.
It should show up there if she was on the phone, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would show up twice, I think, because
She's up there and muted, doesn't she?
well, she usually appears also.
Right.
She's been in here and in judiciary a lot. So we have a bunch of other people that aren't with us yet on the list. We have Susanna Davis, Damien, Matt. I didn't mean to dismiss you, Damien, by saying it that way, but Damien is with us. Max Barrows, Amanda Garcias, and Chief Richard Menard, and Mark Hughes. And I know Mark Hughes won't be joining us until for a little while longer, because he had something else he had to do. Let me be the skunk at the garden party here. And I've had this role many times over the past couple of years, so I guess I shouldn't be afraid to ask it. My question is this. We heard from Carol about a number of things that her tribes have talked about that would be that really need to be done. Things like healthcare centers that can incorporate both traditional medicine Western medicine and education and cultural centers. We heard from Susan that there are many things that we should be doing around people with physical or mental conditions. And thank you, Susan, for that, because I know that one of the things that we became very aware of was that we put the deaf community into the category of people with a disability, and people who are deaf do not have a disability. They are a different community. And it's not, and that was made very clear to us a few years ago when we were dealing with the Austin school. So I think it's important that we not think of, and Landmark College now advertises people with learning differences because they learn differently. So anyway, I regress there a little bit, but so we know some of the things that we need to do. And, oh wait, there's Wilda. Okay, I'm gonna stop being the skunk now and jump to Wilda here, and then I'll be the skunk at the garden party later. So Wilda, would you like to, I don't know if you heard the discussion that we've had so far, but we did talk about, Susan did acknowledge your testimony, and we'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Wilda White, and I'm the founder of an organization called Mad Freedom, whose mission is to secure power and influence to end the oppression and discrimination of people based on their perceived mental states. We envision a world where everybody, regardless of class and race and gender and sexuality and ableness and mental state, is able to live lives of their own design without coercion and with equality under the law. I'm sorry I wasn't able to hear your previous discussion. I had a meeting with the Department of AHS that ran from 1 to 2, so I just finished up. But I appreciate being provided the opportunity to speak with you today. The reason I requested an opportunity to speak with you is because when I read H96, it's not clear to me that it includes people who have and continue to endure systemic, institutional, structural oppression and discrimination based on their perceived mental state, based on a psychiatric diagnosis or psychiatric label or psychiatric disability. The bill itself uses the term mental disability, and it's undefined, and it's unclear to me whether you mean by that also a psychiatric label. And I think oftentimes in my own advocacy, I come across people who are shocked when I suggest that people who have been given psychiatric diagnosis or mental illness, that they are subject to discrimination and oppression. And I don't know if that's shared here, but just to share with you a few of the reality for people who have who've been diagnosed with a mental illness or who are perceived as having a mental illness. We have the highest rates of disproportionate unemployment. We have the highest rates of disproportionate incarceration. We are 16 times more likely to be killed by police. We die 20 to 25 years prematurely. 70% of employers say they would fire someone who had not, who was, 70% of employers say they wouldn't hire someone who was currently taking an antipsychotic medication. 25% of employers say that they would fire someone who did not disclose the mental illness. And 58% of employees say they do not want to work with someone who has a mental illness. Here in the state of Vermont, we still have laws on the books that deny people with a psychiatric disability the right to marry. Until last legislative session, and until it was removed because of the advocacy of Mad Freedom, we said that people with psychiatric disabilities could not consent to sex. And so, these are very clear instances of structural oppression And I think that therefore, people who have, either a psychiatric diagnosis or perceive that way should be included in this Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I'll stop there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Does anybody have any questions now? I do, we did have a little conversation before you came on about the use of the word disability and how, whether that is a really good term to use or condition or, I don't know, but I've always, it always bothers me that we like to say that somebody who operates differently than I do has a disability. And I can tell you in that, if that's the way we identify it, then my husband certainly has a disability because he can't read instructions and he can't get himself organized, and operate. He doesn't think in the same way that I think. And so that term has always bothered me a little bit because, but anyway, I guess that's a different conversation.
I don't think that's a different conversation. I think it's this conversation because I think the term disability is actually part of our ableist society, right? We center ability and we say anyone who doesn't have this set of abilities is other. And so even within our language, that is a form of systematic oppression and discrimination. I don't use the word disability to describe myself because I don't want to perpetuate the centering of ableness and saying that people who don't have kind of this normative ableness are therefore disabled. I don't ascribe to that. And so I think when I read the bill, in some ways, it's really hard to fight oppression in a system where oppression is so much a part of our language and so much a part of how we distribute opportunity. So I'm glad, Senator White, that you are thinking about this issue at that level, because I think that is a level that we do need to think about it if we do want to undo, structural, systematic, institutional oppression.
Thank you. So I see Susanna has joined us, and I hope you'll be able to stay with us, Wilda. And I see Susanna has joined us, so would you like to weigh in? And we are just pleasantly being joined by Senator Clarkson, who has just flown back in a hurry to get here for this hearing. So Susanna, if you would like to, and I don't know if you have been listening, but we've heard from Representative Colston and Coach Christie and Stevens, and from Carol and Susan and Wilda and Chief Don Stevens. And so here we are. And if you want to weigh in on this and let us know what you think.
Yes, thank you. For the record, Susanna Davis, Racial Equity Director for the state. And if you have heard from all of that long list of my peers around the state, then I don't want to be repetitive of anything that they may have said. So I will just say that the prospect of having a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the state of Vermont is very exciting. And there's a lot riding on this. We want to make sure that we do this right. It's been centuries since some of the earliest instances of oppression have been occurring on this soil, and even today the pain from that is still felt. And so when we create a process that resurfaces those trauma and those wounds, we want to make sure that A, it's for a good purpose and that there's going to be meaningful action taken as a result of it, and B, that we're not going to cause harm during the process. So I'll speak to those two issues specifically, and I'll start with harm during the process. So one of the things that we've learned, not just from jurisdictions around this country, but from places around the world, is that the level of hurt and trauma and healing and interpersonal relations is extremely strained and is very heightened when we go through truth and reconciliation or any conciliatory historical harm acknowledgement processes. And because of that, it's important that we entrust this work to people who are qualified to do it, people who have experience doing it, and people who will be able to engage various constituencies in ways that are respectful and inclusive and productive. And productive isn't defined by state government or the people who plopped a government on top of existing peoples. Productive is defined by those peoples who have been historically impacted. So we want to make sure that the people who are conducting this process are well-trained, well-versed, and really have a clear vision for the outcomes that we want to see in this process. And a lot of those outcomes will not be known to us until impacted populations speak their piece and let us know what it is that's going to help heal. Another aspect of it is meaningful, tangible action. It is often the case that we engage in processes like these and ask people to relive their or their ancestral harm and trauma, and then we collect their stories and package them and report on them and then put it away. Consider it done and dusted, job well done. And this is one such activity where I would just urge us as a collective not to do that. It is not just a moral insult to people, but it's an insult to what power government has and what we can do for us not to do something about whatever it is that we hear through this process. So what I would say is that the establishment of such a commission would be monumental and would, again, set Vermont apart from many of its other states in the nation who have yet to reach this point. And more importantly than collecting the qualitative data that this process will surface is what we're going to do about it so that people's suffering and people's experiences were not in vain. And so I just have to reiterate this, and I know you hear me say this very often in this committee, but this is an investment in a process that will then tell us what else we should invest in. This is not going to be the bulk of our investment in repairing historical harm for marginalized communities, whether they were defined by their racial group, their ethnicity, their ability, their orientation, etc. So those really are the 2 points that I wanted to make. Was number one, we want to create a process through which we are not re-traumatizing. And number two, that it is of paramount importance that we establish some commitment to acting on what we hear through this process. I will stop there. And of course, I invite any questions or feedback you may have.
Thank you. So this bill clearly has raised a lot of interest in the Senate, and I've talked to a lot of people about it, and I will, at the risk, as I said before, of being the skunk at the garden party, I will raise some of those questions and concerns. Some of them are just from me and some of them are from other members in the Senate, because we have 30 people here and there are only 5 of us on this committee. So we are going to have to satisfy 25, we're gonna have to satisfy 30 people. So I'm just gonna throw out the concerns and questions that I've heard. And then I think that the way to do this is just to open it up and let you have the conversation with us about why those questions are meaningful, why they're not, what the answers could be, and go in that direction. Does that make sense, committee? to do that. And I would say that committee members, if you have other questions, because I think this discussion is too hard to ask directed questions at any one person, because it's such a it's a big thing, and it's bigger than any one person or any one group. So if that makes sense, so I'll throw out some questions here, and then if other committee members, if you have heard concerns or have concerns of your own, and you don't have to identify them as concerns of your own, but just concerns that we have. So we, a few years ago, set up the Office of Racial Equity. There has been some conversation, but I don't think that's to go there this year, that maybe we need to change the name from racial equity to just equity, because it's going beyond racial equity, but that is what it is right now. And the goal was to find the processes and the systemic racism that occur in the state, that and hopefully make those changes so that we don't keep repeating that discrimination. And there have been changes made, and I think that, for me anyway, I think, Susanna, that you're doing just an amazing job, and we keep piling more and more and more on top of you. So the question is, why would we not, instead of setting up an independent commission, which is quite an expensive one? I think it's like almost $4.5 million over the next 3 years.
1.3 million a year.
Yeah. So why would we not instead give you some extra people in your office with this as their sole purpose is to do this, and to work with the community groups and the populations that are addressed here, and come back to you with recommendations for where we need to move, and because we know some of the things. I mean, Carol pointed out, I think, 5 or 6 different things that were important that she'd talked to her tribes about, or the tribes about, and there were healthcare centers that could have both traditional and Western medicine combined in them, cultural centers, scholarships for people entering colleges. So we know that some of the places that we can actually do something, and why would we not, instead of spending $4.5 million, spend less on the people that are doing the investigations and more on setting up some of those programs that we already know about. Those are a couple of the things that have come up. Also, that there is no oversight over this commission at all. It's it doesn't report to anybody. It's just out there. I'm looking at some of the notes that came up, and how does this commission relate to the Office of Racial Equity? What is the relationship there? I guess at this point, I guess unless other people have questions that they can think of right now, those are some of the things that are swirling around here that we have to answer and satisfy. So anybody feel free to jump in. I guess just either put up your little yellow hand, or you can put up your real hand, and I will. Yes, Chief Stevens.
Thank you. I'm not going to address what you asked Susanna, because that's up to her to speak about. What I want to, you mentioned a couple of times about the Native community wanting to include Native medicines into the community health centers. Just to let you know, it goes way beyond that. I mean, I was part of the health assessment in 2018, and then there was the 5-year health improvement plan that the state had to kind of do. And we found that many of the people who are on this panel in our communities have one of the highest rates of chronic diseases, mental illness, just goes on and on and on. And I think that part of the reconciliation moving forward is also living up to the creed of those documents. I don't know what has been done, at least that I'm aware of, to address that health assessment that we know that we have problems with healthcare, just getting access to preventative healthcare, not just our cultural medicine. We can go to our native people for that if we just wanted native medicines, right? I'm just saying that, you know, it's actual healthcare, affordable healthcare, access to healthcare, access to dental, being proactive in combating these health disparities instead of just on a sheet of paper saying, yeah, we know you have health disparities, you're one of the highest, and all of this money is going into the health department, CDC, from the CDC, and we're not seeing much of that, or at least not to date yet. So I am saying not only is it a reconciliation of the past, but it's also how are we going to fix these things moving forward. So I just want to clarify that I'm hoping that this commission or whatever process is put in place is going to address that. And just like the systemic bias or implicit bias, people put that Native people are not allowed to do gaming because they assume stereotypically we're going to build a casino or we're going to do bingo. I mean, that's just implicit bias. When actually the treasurer a few years ago actually put in a bill to have a casino on Lake Champlain to build revenue, and there was no language in a bill to prevent that from happening. I mean, that's just a bill that's put into the legislative body. They either deny it or they don't. But it was put in our bill specifically because they feel all Indians are going to do gaming. So I'm just saying that there is an implicit bias that has to be addressed, but it's also what are we doing to help everybody again on a level playing field. So I just want to clarify that. I'm hoping that this also addresses that. Thank you.
Thanks. And I think that is what I was trying to get at is what we heard from the Appropriations Committee was that there is $70 million more in requests than they have available to spend. Someplace we're going to have to cut $70 million. And so the question that is swirling around is if we know that dental care is a really huge issue, would we be better off putting $500,000 or $1 million into real dental care than into this commission? And I don't know the answers to that. That's, but those are the questions. Susanna, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I am glad that the questions that you have asked are unattributed, so I don't have to feel bad about how I'm about to answer them. So I'll go through them in the order in which you stated them. Why not give the staff and money to the Office of Racial Equity? Because it is a moral insult to people of color for embedded offices within a government that was plopped down on unceded land to then go back to those communities and say, how can we make it better? It should be independent. It shouldn't live in the Office of Racial Equity. Not that we wouldn't do a fantastic job and not that we wouldn't give it our absolute all with the highest standards of personal and professional ethics that we would give it, because this office is passionate about this and about restorative justice and about righting wrongs and about acknowledging history. And yet, we do agree that it is appropriate for this to be an independent commission. It not only lends credibility to the work itself, it also decouples and untangles the work from some of the inner workings of state government. Again, I believe that the current administration and the Racial Equity Office are absolutely equipped to do this and to do it in a way that's effective and meaningful. However, I do strongly support this being an independent agency nonetheless. You mentioned oversight, and it's along the same lines. You know, I don't have roots in the United States. I am the root.
I miss that. Sometimes your voice fades out a little.
Sorry, I'm going to shout. I don't have roots in the United States. I am the root. I'm first generation here. And so American history is not my history. And yet to do this job, you have to know it inside and out, because a good 20% of this job is just teaching Americans about their own history. That said, I do think that the oversight of this commission should come from the people and should come from impacted populations, because that's really going to help formalize our stated goal of helping people shape their own destinies, especially those of us whose destinies were violently shaped many, many years ago. So I do agree with the current structure. I do agree with keeping it independent. I also do note that whenever we talk about anything related to equity or justice, it is very often the case that within 10 seconds of the conversation starting, we'll talk about the cost, we'll talk about the money.
Mhm.
And the $4.5 million that we're talking about it's not even going to begin to cover the harm that's been done over the course of centuries on this territory. So when we think about what has been gained through oppression, through systemic racism, through bias, through genocide, through violence, we think about what has been gained over the course of history. A few $1 million is a drop in the bucket. And I think that if this is an investment that helps us get closer to restorative justice and gets us closer to closing that gap that is very much within our power to close, then it's a worthwhile investment. Now, I am also somebody who does not favor big government. I do not like government bloat, and that's because I'm coming from a jurisdiction where there was just money to burn, a city with a budget of nearly $100 billion, and they just had so many unnecessary offices and staff persons. So I'm very sensitive to issues of government waste and government bloat. And so ordinarily, I am not the first person to be calling for new working groups, new committees, et cetera. But again, if we do this right, then this can be a very powerful and very effective part of government that's going to have a lasting impact. The next question you asked was, what would the relationship be with the Office of Racial Equity? It is my hope that it would be a close one. I do note that in the early drafts of this bill, Racial Equity Office was listed as part of the appointing and selection committee. So it is our intent to maintain an extremely close relationship with this work, but again, to make sure that it has the credibility that it deserves, we will only play as much of a role as the public and the impacted populations want us to play. I do see the Racial Equity Office as being an arm of government that helps identify shortcomings and biases and to develop good policies. In other words, an office that helps us to let go of the bad practices and adopt the good ones. But the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I think, has a little bit of a different goal in there. And so we would want to support that, but we do recognize that the conciliatory aspects of this work are unique to the commission and therefore may or may not be our place to get involved in that. And I do just want to make one more note about the money. I recognize that we're always having a conversation about what do we cut from. It is often the case that I make a suggestion, not necessarily in state government, but just somewhere in the world for an equity related item. And the first thing they'll say is, well, we're going to have to figure out where to pull the money from. Well, I recommend we pull it from anything that's not equity centered. I think everything we do and everything we pay for should be equity oriented. And if it's not, why is it on the table? Because it is often the case that we consider equity work soft work, and as such, less deserving of funds. We expect people to volunteer their time and energy and labor as a cost cutting measure. We're having similar conversations on other bills related to equity. And I feel myself working myself up, so I'm going to stop there.
No, I like it because that's exactly what I need, because I don't.
Because we're gonna have to advocate for this.
Yeah, we are going to have to.
We need as much of your advocacy as possible, Ms. Susanna.
So would you just, I was just piqued by something that you said, and then I see both Susan and Representative Colston have their hands up, and I'll call on them, but would you just tell me what you meant by whatever isn't equity work? I mean,
yes.
Which is?
Happy to, yes. If we have 2 proposals for roadway projects, I'm making something up out of thin air because I'm looking at the street outside. If we have two proposals for roadway projects and one of them is designed to create transportation equity and the other one is not, I would strongly recommend funding the one that advances transportation equity first. There are a lot of proposals that cannot directly be linked to a beneficial outcome that advances equity. They may be good in and of themselves, but they may still be serving the same members of dominant groups who have always had the same privileges and considerations afforded to them. When we have policies that are not explicitly equity oriented and are just there to continue serving people who have always been served first and most, then it is incumbent upon us that we prioritize those that are actually going to move the needle. I was part of a briefing this morning that gave us updated demographic numbers, and it was startling. It was startling to see how many people have left the state, how few people are joining the state, and how we're going to have to rebuild our demographics. And part of that is by putting our money where our mouth is and our policy where our mouth is, and doing things that are explicitly advancing an equity goal and not just more pattern matching. I hope that that helps to answer the question. If not, I can rephrase in a less long-winded way.
Well, it is, it's helpful. I have to admit that I get confused sometimes, and as you know, I can put my foot in my mouth pretty easily. But so what would be an equity transportation project? I mean, I have two we have a bridge in Brattleboro that absolutely is falling apart, and that bicycle riders are being hit on all the time, and something else. Well, what does it, an equity, I know this is getting way off the topic here, but in my mind anyway, I need to have a really basic understanding so that I can justify whatever we come up with and convince all of us, convince our other senators that this is a good thing to do. So just tell me a little bit about what would be an equity transportation project.
I did a quick search because there was one in particular that I am so in love with, and I can't remember what city it was. I think Portland, but there's also in Clarkston, Washington, where they took a highway and just said, this is now a green walkway. It is often the case that if you look close enough in American history, you will find many examples of them putting superhighways and other infrastructural projects right through Black communities in a way that is not only economically and socially disruptive, but is also extremely health disruptive. And I mean emotional health and physical health. And that is one example of a way that transit, or more broadly infrastructure, can be used to intentionally disrupt communities. And that's not, you don't have to take my word for it. This is written down by the people who did it. And so when we think about transit equity, one of the projects that I love so much that happens around the country is when we take a road and say, you know what, we don't need this road. This road was physically segregationist, and we just make it green, and it's good for the ecology, and it's good for the animals, and it's good for people. And there is one near the Snake River in Washington. There's another one in Portland. I think there's one down in South Carolina. And these are just examples of us reimagining the built environment and the service infrastructure in a way that is equity oriented. Another one would be perhaps adding an exit on a highway to a neighborhood that may be underserved or more difficult to access, right? So it can go in both directions. The point of it is that at any project that we can draw a direct line to better outcomes by demographic group is more likely to be equity oriented. And that's the kind of policy that we should be focusing our dollars on. We're often told we have to make hard decisions in the budgeting process, but Vermont has received more money now in these last 2 years than in decades prior, I think. So yes, we're making difficult decisions, but within a context where we are, pardon the phrase, flush with cash. It's very hard to continue questioning socially equitable investments in this context.
Thank you. You always tease my brain. So I'm going to, I see Susan and Representative Colson also have their hands up, but Mark has just joined us and I'm going to give him a chance to weigh in first and then go to Susan and Representative Colson. And is that okay with you? Because Mark just was able to join us. So Mark, welcome.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. And I will be around for the duration.
Okay.
So before I come in, I'm happy to step back because I would imagine that the other two folks may have had something relevant to the ongoing conversation. So I'm happy to step back for a few minutes, Madam Chair.
Oh, thank you. And I think we also are going to be looking at this again next week. So we'll make sure that everybody gets an invite then too. So Susan, did you?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have a 2:30 meeting to go to, and then I'm supposed to testify in Senate Ed after 3. So I appreciate getting to throw in my 2 cents here. You know, we in the disability community, I'm going to address your question about the cost at this time. In the disability community, absolutely is wanting a lot of money for a lot of delayed maintenance, deferred maintenance, and wages that have just never been paid. You know, the workforce that serves people with disabilities in the home and community-based setting, the Medicaid funded workforce is just absolutely decimated. So I'm not insensitive to the question of cost at this time, and couldn't we use the money to serve the people who were harmed in some other way? I just want to say that the process that the House Housing General, I'm getting their name wrong, but anyway, that the House committee led by Chair Stevens went through was so powerful as to the value of a true reconciliation process. And if you happen to have a spare 10 or 20 hours in your life, I encourage you to look at some of the testimony they took from people involved in reconciliation processes in Canada, in Maine, in other countries, because it is just profoundly powerful. And, you know, I'm so struck by the harms caused by eugenics laws in Vermont and how little Vermonters in general, but in particular Vermont legislators, actually know about our own history. I think what Susanna just said about having to teach Americans our history is so spot on. And so I think it's money really well spent, because I think the state has no idea what it did to its own citizens in the name, you know, of doing good. But forcing people to be sterilized so that they could leave Brandon, that's just wrong. And no one knows about it. And people need to know and hear about it. And I don't know how you put a price on that. I really think that the process, especially for legislators to go through so that we don't get more laws like this in the future, is just would be super important. The meeting that I have to go attend at 2:30 is actually about the health disparities amongst people with disabilities. I can't say enough about the health disparities of people with disabilities. I think COVID has really brought to light the health disparities of Black Americans, Black Vermonters, Vermonters of color, so disproportionately impacted in every aspect of this pandemic. And it's these exact chickens from programs like eugenics coming home to roost. Poor access, people having to work frontline jobs, it goes on and on and on. And so I don't think that setting up, I think that any expense in setting up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission like this is money well spent to promote a more just, better society in the future, and hopefully a real education for legislators going forward. And now I do have to run, but thank you again for taking this bill up. And we really do support it in the disability community. And I think it's really important that the legislature takes seriously its promise to do more. And I don't think when they made the promise, they're expecting to do more for nothing. Maybe you were, I sure hope not. But when the apology was passed, it came with a promise to do something else. So I hope people keep that promise.
Thank you, Susan. We'll see you next week. Okay, bye. Representative Colston, you had your hand up also, I saw.
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you. I think a slippery slope that we legislators find ourselves on sometimes is our angst to want to prescribe what needs to be done, prescribe the solution, and doing so and not fully understanding why. And I think this TRC process, with its cost, is all about supporting a descriptive process. And that takes time, that takes people. And I think we would all be better served if we fully understand the truth that will be shared that can illuminate our thinking about what ought to be done to correct the harm. Thank you.
Thank you. Good, okay. So I'm going to throw out another question that has kind of come up that, oh, Senator Carson.
Yeah, I was
did you
just gonna
have
ask,
first?
did Mark want to weigh in or just back? I saw his
Yeah,
email, he
but-
wanted to go last,
Yeah.
but does he, given he would be the
Yeah.
last presenter, I think, today, does he want to go now?
I'm just gonna throw out another
Okay,
question
sorry.
though. That, because one of the questions, and this is probably an entirely different kind of oppression and discrimination with different results, but when the Italians were brought over here by the droves, whether they wanted to come or not, I don't know, to work in Barrie, particularly in the granite and marble industries, that there was a lot of discrimination there around them. So is this, this details a few very specific communities, but it doesn't detail those other communities that have probably suffered from oppression over the past, and even very poor rural residents in areas where they really were discriminated against. I grew up in northern Minnesota, and I can tell you that there was a fair amount of discrimination against really poor people who lived, most of us were poor, but the really poor people who didn't even have floors in their houses, they had dirt floors, and that was northern Minnesota. So that's a different history, but are we talking about kind of oppression in general here and looking at all of the history of Vermont and how that impacted different groups of people, or and I don't know who would respond to that, but I know that there are, like, I think it's 5 different communities here that are identified. And it does say in the commissioner's discretion, other populations and communities, but I'm just wondering how serious we are and whether it even makes sense to look at some of those other communities. Does that make any sense at all as a question? And if not, you can just tell me to button it. I saw a hand. Damien. Well, I see your hand, Damien, but oh, there you come.
About that, just getting my computer on. Thank you. For the record, Damien Leonard, Legislative Counsel. I just wanted to note that the communities on in the bill were based on the communities mentioned in the apology for eugenics. So that's why you'll see mention of, for example, individuals with French Canadian, French Indian, or other mixed ethnic or racial heritage. So that was where the naming came from. Here was a decision by the House to focus on the eugenics bill, because there was some discussion over there of how broad they should make the charge, and that's where they settled. I'm not saying that's the right position, but I just thought that'd be helpful context to understand why these particular groups were chosen rather than others.
What, did they talk about at all about leaving it to the commissioners to kind of identify what groups might be?
There was some discussion about just how broad they wanted to make it and whether they wanted to leave it entirely up to the commissioners. The decision was made to put in the 4 listed groups, then with discretion for the commissioners to add others to their inquiry. And the thought was that would give the commissioners an idea of what the legislature was asking, but also give them the freedom to determine the direction that the panel ultimately took. So.
Yep, okay, thanks, Damien.
Sure.
Does anybody else want to respond to that, or just? Okay, so Mark, would you like to weigh in? Where are you? Oh, there you are. And before you start, Mark, I think I'm going to say we have had some testimony, and I think many of us are grappling with this, not because we disagree with the intent of it, but just how it fits all together and how it's going to be presented and supported. And and we are going to continue committee discussion and just grappling with this, but I just wanted to give you also a chance to weigh in, and then when you're done, I see Wilda has her hand back up. So Mark, I think this is the first time you've been here this year.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Senator Clarkson, Senator Rahm, Senator Polina, Senator Collmore. It is good to be back in Senate Government Operations again.
Can you talk a little bit louder, Mark?
Or turn your volume up, maybe.
Yeah, I think Senator Clarkson's idea is better. Let me see if I can figure that out. Just give me a brief moment. I'm gonna work on that. No, I'm not. I'm just gonna be happy with what I have, and I'm just gonna speak loudly.
Okay, good idea.
For the record, my name is Mark Hughes, Reverend Mark Hughes. I am the Executive Director of Vermont Racial Justice Alliance and Justice for All. I'm also a minister at New Alpha Missionary Baptist Church here in the lovely city of Burlington, Vermont, where we are the only church that worships in the African-American tradition in the state. I'm also the Senior Vice Commander and Commander-elect of Howard Plant Post 782, the Veterans of Foreign War here in the city of Burlington. I'm honored to be with you. I appreciate the invitation on such a very challenging and difficult conversation as reconciliation. First, for the record, I wanted to just reflect upon why we're here and just give some background on kind of the perch that I've been sitting from watching this thing unfold, Madam Chair. You may know that in last biennium, in the 1920 biennium, the Racial Justice Alliance introduced a bill called H478, which was a bill that proposed a reparations task force, very similar to the task force that's here in the city of Burlington, and modeled after the late John Conyers HR 40, which has been challenged to move out of committee for the last 33 years in the United States House of Representatives. And oh, by the way, for the first time in history, did move out of committee this session. So that work, just as kind of some background for the rest of the committee, because Madam Chair, you and I have been at this ever since we started. So you've had a front row seat, and we've been kind of respectfully holding hands during this process of the policy work of the Alliance. You may recall the racial disparities in the criminal and juvenile justice system advisory panel work, Madam Chair, as we sat contemplating as to whether or not we wanted to create this office independently, and actually refuted a governor veto and went back in special session to get the work done in special session Act 9 in 2018 to get the Office of Racial Equity done. You may recall also prior to that, sitting in your other committee, which is our esteemed Senator Sears Judiciary, where we were able to march through the racial disparities in the criminal and juvenile justice system advisory panel the year prior to that. There's been a consistent pattern, in fact, as you will, to the work that the Alliance has been doing to advance the cause of racial justice in Vermont, racial equity and racial justice in Vermont, and unapologetically so. Some of the work that we've been doing just recently, as you may recall, if I may quote from a recent enactment, R113, a joint resolution, which I think would be a parallel resolution to the eugenics resolution, which was a great one, and we support it. Ours says that racism constitutes a public health emergency in Vermont, and be it further resolved that this legislative body commits to the sustained and deep work of eradicating systemic racism throughout the state, actively fighting racist practices and participating in the creation of a more just and equitable systems. And it further resolves that the legislative body commits to coordinating work and participating in ongoing action grounded in science and data to eliminate race-based health disparities and eradicate systemic racism. It goes on to further resolve that the Secretary of State, the Governor, the Chief Justice, the Vermont Supreme Court, and the League of Cities and Towns would receive a copy of this resolution. We took it serious, and we believe that you did too. I said all of that to say this, and that is that there is a trajectory that we're working on. As you recall, there was an enactment called 33 just last year that came from H210, which we call a health disparities policy. So we know now that there is a Health Equity Advisory Commission. Why is that? The reason why we put that forward is because we were concerned about those disparities as they play out in the healthcare system. We know that they're playing out across housing, education, employment, health services, economic development. Why? Because there's this thing called systemic racism. That's the work that we've signed up to do, and that's the work that we continue to do. In fact, again, when we look at our wellness, when we look at our work surrounding wellness, how we've really framed it up is that anything that we can do to mitigate systemic racism is a step in the right direction for the wellness of Black folks. So what happened over this period of time, we also put forward H406, which you don't see. H406 never made it across this session. Why did it not make it across this session? Because in the House, our economic empowerment, our economic equity was not a priority in the House, despite the resolution that I just read. If it was, you'd see it in the Senate today. You'd also see a policy called H273, which was a land access bill that was actually being pushed across that we were supportive of. So there's a lot of work that was going on and continues to go on, Madam Chair, to address systemic racism. Why? Because we don't think any other oppressions exist? Of course not. But we don't complain that the Vermont Center for Independent Living is not advocating racism all day long. And therein lies the challenge of the difficult discussion. And increasing the level of difficulty in the discussion is when our legislature decides to combine all of these systems of oppression and bring all of us together, because there is a tendency to create a syndrome that I like to refer to as crabs in the bucket, or what we like to sometimes refer to as a false narrative of scarcity, because what oppression creates is we turn against one another. We have a tendency to turn against one another. Are there comments from the room, Madam Chair?
No, there was a lot of noise outside in the hallway, and Brian just went out to ask them to please be quiet because we couldn't hear.
So you might repeat like your last.
Senator Callamore.
Welcome.
He went out there and shut it down.
He did.
Well, so that's one of the reasons why this conversation gets so complicated is because of that, because we have brought so many different groups of folks with different systems of oppression that they are challenged with. And what happens is there's a tendency to assume that the other group is, first of all, not interested in my oppression or what it is that is important to us. And for the record, as far as the nations of Abenaki have expressed, and those others who support this policy, we'd be on the record as supporting it for them. We do not support it for us. So while this work was going on, I hear that there was a JRH2. I remember JRH2, and I think Tom Stevens would say that this is a follow-on to JRH2. And I just want to make sure that the air is clear, and also our minds are clear in terms of what we're thinking about and what we're trying to get done here. So the JRH2 trajectory and how this kind of connects, whether that's the case or not, we're not so concerned about that, but it makes perfect sense that a Truth and Reconciliation bill would follow a JRH2, as it has outlined eugenics as being a major issue. Were Black people affected? Of course they are. They always are, but that's not the point. That's not what we came for. What we're talking about here is that we know that the Abenaki people, that they deserve this type of acknowledgement and they deserve this type of attention, and preferably without our distraction. I would like to see this happen for the Abenaki people without clouding the issue, if you will. I know others may have different opinions, but the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, a committee of 8 of us who put together our legislative agenda, which is called Acknowledge, Change, and Transform, that's ACT. A specific component of that policy initiative was a reparations bill, H387. The reason why we put forward H387, I'm going to connect you back to where I started, is because H478 last year, last biennium, was left on the wall in House Government Operations. Now, in conversations with your colleague, our esteemed Chair Sarah Copeland Hanses, she made it very clear to me that the reason why that this policy, this reparations policy, was not going forward in House Government Operations is because there was no political will. There was no political will to do so. So I know that Representative Colson and Representative Christie, I know that the folks who are Chair Stevenson and Chair and Representative Bloom and others did decide that in lieu of reparations, the reparations, which by the way is simply a task force. It's just, hey guys, go figure it out, come back and give us some ideas, just like this is in a way, but specifically focused at the reconstruction question. in their end, and I hope those who are in this committee and those who are watching are getting some level of immersion and some level of acclimation to the issue of addressing systemic racism, because it is the legacy of slavery. Hence PR2, Madam Chair, the constitutional amendment to abolish slavery, which is headed to the ballot. So we want to have specific conversations, and it was intentional because we had a conversation before this was introduced as we were creating our legislative agenda, that is to say, our policy group of the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, knowing that H96 was not named at the time, but knowing it was coming forward, because we'd already had the conversation with folks who did not possess the political will to move the reparations policy. We intentionally decided to still put the reparations policy forward, not just out of spite or agitation or anything like that, because it is the point. You can't talk about addressing the issue of 1865, we'll say 1877. You can't talk about post-Reconstruction. You can't talk about the demise that the United States slipped into after 1877, that we affectionately refer to as the Jim Crow South, but we know is lynching, convict leasing, as well as sharecropping and all of the horror that went with that, and the legacy that came after that, which still exists to this day, which created poverty in the Black community and created Black people as the beneficiary of poverty. That's why most Black people are poor, despite the fact that most poor people are white. So we wanted to have an intentional discussion on this. So it's very difficult coming into these committee meetings, because my hope is that some of this stuff we can get outside of the committee, and we can get into classrooms, and we can get into conversations, and we can teach more of this. Like turning the curve on systemic racism, which I've offered out to all legislators and only seen maybe a couple show up. That'll be on Thursday here at the Kemp Center, and it'll be Zooming. So, Madam Chair, what we decided to do was to put this policy forward. And when we went and testified towards the policy of reparations, when we went to testify in our House committee, this is essentially the conversation that we had. We do not support it as a signatory. We don't view this policy as being helpful for us as the Racial Justice Alliance. We never did. In fact, this is my personal opinion. I don't see it really being helpful for much of anyone unless it was focused on the Abenaki people, our brothers and sisters over there. I think, as I said again, I'll go back to what Chair Stevens would say, is I believe that his committee views this as the continuation of the work that they started with JRH2. If that's the case, then I don't know why it is or how it is that we're intending to try to fold in all of this other stuff. All the other stuff has its place. We just need the political will to do it in the way in which it needs to be done. Regarding the policy itself, I will not, let me pause there before I get into the policy. Madam Chair, just step back for a minute if there's any questions from the committee, anybody in the committee.
Anybody have any questions so far? No, I think you can keep on, Mark. And
regarding the policy itself, again, this is a very difficult conversation. Because I'm not an elected official, it's a lot easier for me to have this conversation. I think that, again, the challenge here is we're trying to do a lot of things at the same time. And I want to kind of echo something that our illustrious racial equity executive director said, and I just will paraphrase it, is legislators need to do the work. They need to put the money where the issues are. If we're saying that we're committed to doing this work, we shouldn't be nearing the end of the session talking about there's not enough money. What should have happened is since it's a commitment and since it's a priority, it should have been the first thing that you invested in. Madam Chair, not directed at you, but we know that systemic racism, the legacy of slavery, has created significant wealth disparities and cultural disempowerment among Black Vermonters. We submitted a moral budget towards the beginning of the session. We submitted an economic equity bill, as I said, H406. Crickets. So it's, in a way, if we're really doing this work, it's just like anything that we do, Madam Chair, even in our homes. This is where we are investing our money. That is where our priorities are, and that's where our commitments lie. This is not appropriations. This is not Ways and Means. So nobody in this committee has to take this exceptionally personally. However, Madam Chair, that has not been reflected in the actions of this legislature this session. Despite, and I think I heard I think I heard Director Green say, Director Susanna say, we haven't had this kind of money in 10 years. I would go on the record and correct that and say, this is an unprecedented budget that we've had this year. We have never had this much money, ever. But yet and still, we couldn't seem to figure it out. The first thing I want to note on H96 is the process of dismantling institutional, structural, and systemic discrimination in Vermont. And I just personally, one of the distractions that I saw when I first picked this document up is the use of the term discrimination in this particular context. Now, I'm going to speak to the policy anyway, despite the fact that I don't really feel that this is about us, but I think there might be a couple of things, Madam Chair, that could be helpful in this conversation. Because the term discrimination is actually a legal term. It's a legal term that it has a lot to do with civil law. So I'm having a hard time reading this. In terms of policies, I think largely what I'm seeing this thing do is it's largely addressing policy. It's largely addressing the ability of these folks to go in and to identify policy that somehow or another is creating challenges of institutional, structural, and systemic discrimination in Vermont. And that's it. So we know that dismantling, I'm just going to use the term systemic racism, because that's the language that we use. It's the language that you used in this document here. It's the language in the executive director's enabling statute. It's the language that we've decided is going to be appropriate, but somehow or another, we're not using it here. But I know with systemic racism, if that's what we're talking about, to do so requires a whole lot more than addressing policies. And I would assume that it's going to be the same thing with any other system of oppression. In fact, what we've seen is that the game plan in eradicating racism, and that was largely focused on segregation, desegregation, the game plan worked very well for our LGBTQIA communities, as well as those communities which are, excuse the term, abilities communities. In other words, they took the playbook from the civil rights movement and made significant progress, and in some cases beyond that which we were able to make. That exists today. I don't understand why we wouldn't consider that as an option in this case, but we'll come back to that. The thing that I'm really getting at, Madam Chair, is that there is much, much more to this work. And I, even if we were going to look at policies, I would hope that conversation would extend out into rules, that we would be looking at institutions, that we would be looking at structures, because there's a lot of work to be done here. The institutional, structural, and systemic discrimination in Vermont, again, that language is also problematic because there is no reference to federal law. What do you mean there's no reference to federal law? There has to be a line of demarcation if we are serious about this work, where we are serious to the extent that if the federal laws are encroaching on our values, then we push back on them. Well, how in the heck would we do that? Madam Chair, I'm glad you asked. Well, what are we doing with cannabis right now? It's still a Schedule I drug, but right now we're rolling the market out. What have we done with the fair and impartial policing policy? We pushed back on the feds to say, keep your hands off of our people. What have we done with the women's right to choice, for lack of better words? Excuse me for not getting that right. We created statute, and we also have PR5. When the feds encroach on our values, we have to be able to say no. So when we see policies that are federal policies, even if, especially if there's money attached to them, we have to be able to say no, thank you, we don't want your money because we're not willing to do this. That is the commitment. That is the level of commitment that we need to be able to make in this kind of work, in dismantling systemic racism. And also the other piece that's missing is the existence of emerging policies. So not just existing policies, very much like Director Davis has created this, I think we call it a racial impact assessment, or words to that effect, or a equity impact assessment. The work needs to be happening not just with an assessment, recommendations in a report, but there needs to be an ongoing and a continuous process. So policies that are emerging, in other words, that come out of your committee, are also being assessed as well, and other committees. Having 3 commissioners, I'm on page 4, is very problematic. Look at the CCB. If you have 3 commissioners, nobody can ever talk. So you got Kyle over here, Julie's over here, Pepper's over here. There's 2 people are a quorum. What gives? When can you have a conversation about anything? So maybe that's part of the reason why there's delays in getting all of their folks hired right now. I don't know. Love them to death, but I think, Madam Chair, that if there's going to be a commission, with all due respect, 3 people seems like a train wreck. In terms of, I won't.
Mark, just a minute. I think Allison has a
Mark,
question.
I beg to differ with you. We've had some very effective commissions. When I served on House Ways and Means, the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission was a 3-person commission, and I believe the last tax commission, the name of which I can never remember, but it sort of revisited many of the same issues. We've had some very effective commissions in my lifetime here in the legislature that have just been 3 people. So I think it depends on the people, maybe more than the number.
I think it depends on the staff.
There's always room for more than one opinion in the room.
Absolutely. I just wanted to point out that I've experienced some very strong commissions.
I'd only offer a slight pushback on that, is that I don't think any of those commissions were doing this kind of work.
It was thorny.
In fact, I would even challenge and say maybe because of some of the work of those commissions that some of this work is necessary. So I would go to page. If you follow me over to page 6, there's a little bit of a problem that pops out. I'm just trying to help you out a little bit here, Madam Chair. If you look at point number 3, this is 6 of 24, page 6 of 24. And if we were looking at sections, that would be.
What page again, Mark? I'm sorry, we had a little disruption here.
6 of 24, item number 3, just before 903.
What page?
6 of 24.
Well, we only have 19 pages in our bill.
Well, that's a good place to start. So how about if we go to.
We have as passed by the House. So just tell us the section.
Section 2, 902. Item 3, nothing. It says nothing in this subsection shall be construed to require the commission to examine institutional, structural, and systemic discrimination experienced by the populations and communities identified in section 1 of this subsection in isolation or separately from each other.
I can't, can you find it? We're having a hard time finding it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, maybe, I thought I printed the one that came out of the House that was as approved.
It says as passed, and we were just with you in the section under commissioners, which is section 903. And then it goes to 904.
Okay, wait a minute. Oh, wait a minute. Look at the last sentence of the last paragraph of section 902.
902?
Yeah,
Okay.
item 3.
Yeah.
Can you
Gotcha.
read that, please, Senator?
Nothing in this subsection.
Exactly.
Sorry, hold on, our chair is distracted. Hold on one sec.
You don't want that. So while we're getting the chair undistracted, I would just go on to say that in order to rectify the history of the inequities that we're experiencing as a result of systemic racism, the Black community, what we need to do is that we need to meet the Black community, I should say, where they've been previously unmet. So that's what most of the policy that you'll see from us. You know, you've seen we pulled back from policing a little bit because until you guys get oversight right, then what's the point? But as far as, and also it's been really distracting because we haven't really been able to, sometimes you just get tired of saying, stop hurting me, stop killing me, when you really should be saying, we need economic equity, we need equity in our healthcare system. So in collaboration with some of our partners, we're accomplishing this work by expanding into some of these marginalized communities. In other words, other ways to do the work, help ourselves. And some of these programs and services, what we're trying to do is we're trying to meet needs that are currently being unmet because of these systems are either ineffective, they're inefficient, or they're non-existent. So that's what some of the policies that we're looking for. We're not just looking to correct policies that are broken, we're looking to create policies that actually enhance in the lives of our people and enable them to thrive. The problem is we're having a difficult time getting them through you. So again, back to this paragraph. If you look what it says towards the end, is it's saying that these, well, I'll read it. This is nothing in these in this subsection shall be construed to require the commission to examine institutional, structural, and systemic discrimination experienced by populations and communities identified in this subdivision of this subsection in isolation or separately from each other. So I just find that to be problematic because there's an intention to bring these groups together, but there's this disclaimer that states that you're not going to look at their issues separately. So if you're not going to look at their issues separately, then why bring them together? I mean, that's a rhetorical question, but that's what I saw to be problematic. Moving on to section 904, there are 7 members stated here in section 904. However, there seems to be only 5 listed. Were there additional members? Rhetorical.
These 5 people will appoint 7 members. It's 2 different things. I'm going to ask that we spend about 10 more minutes on this, and then we're going to a different topic, and then we will be doing this again next. I found that very confusing also, Mark, but finally figured out.
I'm glad you figured that out, Madam Chair, because I scratched my head on it. The other thing that I saw, and maybe this is also my confusion, is that in section 904, in point number 1, there's you got 7 members selected in September, but their first meeting is in August in section 2, at the number 2 on the next page. No, it looks like it's that should be the other way around or something.
Yeah, no, that's a,
one would think so.
Yeah.
yeah, good catch.
So I'm not going to go much further on what I have because I want to save some of your time, Madam Chair, just in case there was a bit of conversation, and I can come back with. I don't think I had. I had a few other things, but I could send them over to you as well. I'll just conclude with, ominously in Section 907, the executive director duties. The commissioner, finally, they say something about racial justice. Okay, this is the only place where it comes up. This is Section 907, the executive director. If there's nothing else going on in this policy,
Page 14.
Yep.
if there's nothing else going on in this policy that specifically calls out racial justice, then why is it that this commissioner needs to have racial justice experience? So I think just before that, in item 11, right in Section 906, I've just skipped over it, but we may as well just go to town here. It's often I see, it's item 11, it says seek grants and funding and other annual state appropriations to further the work of the commission. Often I see in policy where that's kind of just a boilerplate, but it can be problematic, especially when you have a function like this, because this is really important and it just needs to be funded, hard stop. So when you create a situation, I don't know, like the Human Rights Commission, who receives federal money from HUD, which causes them to have to incorporate language in their policy that's adherent to HUD policy, but detrimental to the process concerning Black folks. You see where I'm going? That's systemic racism. So we'll have an option to raise money. Their budget should be from the general fund, period.
Right.
So I'll just go back over here to, let's get this done. So over on page, I shouldn't say page, in section 908, there's reports, but there seems to be a finality to what's going on here. There's a long delay for anything to happen, for that matter. I think as long as maybe January of 2024, maybe this is taken into account that the advocates will continue to submit policy to you that would be, or budgets to you, or recommendations for oversight to you, or perhaps appointment recommendations that are going to be effective to move this forward. But if this is what we're relying on for something of substance, anything of substance to happen, and we're going to wait until 2024 for that to happen, and that's just going to be a recommendation back to you, which means fiscal 2025 is when something actually does happen, I find that to be problematic. However, maybe that was the intent, but I think it's problematic. I think there should be something that you should get done, some way we can get something done in a shorter time frame. And finally, I'll conclude with the next paragraph in B. This is on June 15, 2026. The commission should submit a final report. In my personal opinion, there should never be a final report in this work. I appreciate your time, and I'll take some questions if you have any, or we can just, if you care for me to stick around for any conversation, Madam Chair. Thank you for having me out.
Thank you, Mark. And you're right, there are some inconsistencies in here, and I think that once we've kind of heard today we wanted to look at kind of the overarching and the philosophy behind why we're doing this, and then I think I'm going to schedule it again next week, and it will probably be Tuesday again, if that doesn't conflict with people. And then I think that what we'll do is start really going through the bill and looking at the details of it, because we had a walkthrough, and then we've heard from people about why we should be doing this, how important it is, and then I think we need to start going through the language and the different sections and how they're put together. And then once we've done that, then we'll figure out what we're going to do with the bill itself, if that makes sense.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. And if I could be invited for Tuesday, I'm happy to come back. I had a couple of other things, but in the interest of time, wanted to hold off. And perhaps maybe next biennium we'll bring reparations.
Well, it doesn't have to be Tuesday. It can be another day next week. So does anybody have an absolute camp day next week? I don't see any, so we'll figure it out. Gail and I set the agenda. We work on that tomorrow at noon, so we'll try and figure this out. Yes.
Yeah, Mark, just before you disappear, I know you're not disappearing, but just you turned the camera off. So before we leave the number of commissioners, because I would just love to know, have you think about what the ideal number of commissioners you think would be appropriate? I mean, 3, you're clear that you don't think 3 is enough, but how many do you think would be good? And part of, I think, the delay is the extensive selection process, I guess, designed to show that no one's, beholden to anybody, but the process is so cumbersome and it takes a lot of time. And so you are already behind the 8 ball in getting the work done by the way this whole thing is selected. So, I mean, I agree with you. I think it's a little slow, but in part it's because of this lengthy selection process.
Yeah, and we will go through those details next week.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to get into those details right now.
No, I know, but that's a piece of the length.
Right. So everybody will get an invite again next week, and we'll also make sure that Max and Amanda and Chief Menard, who weren't with us today, get invites. So if there's anybody else that you can think of that would be helpful in us trying to figure this out, please let Gail or me know, and we'll accommodate them, okay? Oh, and I'm sorry, Chief Stevens, did you have a comment first before we jump to another topic?
Yeah, 2 things. First, I think that it would be appropriate to ask each one of the tribes, since they speak for themselves. Like, I can't speak for El Nu and I can't speak for Cowasac. I can only speak for Nulhegan. So I just think that you should give equal opportunity for each tribe to speak for themselves if they choose to. So I just wanted to make that. And I agree in some ways that what I am looking for Nulhegan is that there are some concrete action items that come out of this, because we can talk all day about what we should have, could have, would have done, but we need to have concrete action items that's actually going to change things instead of just recommendations. That's why I mentioned the ethnic studies bill, that there's a big committee created for 2 years down the road, and they were to make recommendations that may or may not be considered. So, I mean, you spend a whole lot of time with people who have no resources to provide recommendations that don't have to be adopted. So, or don't have to be, they can be considered, but no action items taken. So I just really think that whatever process from the eugenics reconciliation, truth and reconciliation, whether it only applies to people affected by the eugenics or if it's expanded to others, I think there has to be, if it's going to be stretched out to 2026 or 2021, there has to be some sort of concrete things. That's a lot of time to spend on committees to have no action done. I know I don't have that kind of time, but maybe others do, but I just want to at least say that. Thank you.
Thank you. And would you make sure, do you have contacts for all of the tribes that you can send to Gail?
I do, but I think Carol has them all.
Oh, Carol, would you send them to Gail?
I will do that.
Thank you. Okay. All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you. We're going to take just a short break. I apologize for that, but we ran a little bit behind ourselves. And so we're going to take just a quick short break.